good afternoon to everyone. Since Eduardo has already explained the concept of unburnable carbon, I will skip directly to the equity issues that unburnable carbon causes on where to allocate the remaining carbon budget. The question we are trying to answer is which countries are entitled to use the remaining carbon budget today for the transition. In this context, climate justice recognizes the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities to fairly allocate the remaining carbon budget. What we intend to do with this presentation, with this study, is to find criteria to assign fair mitigation efforts for achieving a fair transition. What I intend for a fair effort is a mitigation supply side effort that translates to less rights of extraction for duty-bearer countries or areas inside countries, or compensation to right holders countries to keep the reserve untapped. These criteria I will present are geographical criteria, and based on their type, we can distinct in between countries scale criteria or within country criteria. The between countries scale approach will allow us to allocate, to geovisualize and allocating the fair mitigation efforts between countries, and therefore identifying the rights holders and the duty bearer countries. Whereas for the within country approach, it's an approach at an operational scale that will help us achieving an equitable transition by developing unburnable carbon scenarios to geovisualize where to leave fossil fuels on the ground, and so where extraction should cease. The first step to define criteria is a literature review. These are some keywords for the research. This will help us to come up with a first proposal of economic, infrastructural, but also ecological conservation and socio-cultural criteria. And very important is the data mining of criteria respective parameters in order to quantitatively measure the criteria. In this image, it's part of the database in which we collect the parameters of criteria. And where necessary, parameters must be adjusted by adjustment factors, as we will see in the next slides. Once identified, the criteria, actually the parameters, will be weighted and operationalized to develop spatial multi-criteria analysis at between and the within country scale in JS environment. Here I try to hypothesize some scenarios. For example, ecological conservation scenarios will include the criteria that will help us to develop the multi-criteria analysis to understand the fair efforts that country have to deliver in order to safeguard biodiversity and ecosystems. This is the proposal of criteria divided in the categories. Unfortunately, due to time constraint, I will not explain the reasons behind the selection of each criteria, but I will illustrate scenarios, simple scenarios with two criteria. Must to have criteria in literature, such as the historical responsibilities and the development of a society within a country. The proxies we chose for representing this criteria are the cumulative carbon dioxide emissions and human development index for the development of societies. And as we can see, as the cartogram suggests, we can see that in terms of responsibilities and the required fair mitigation efforts, Global North is required to deliver greater mitigation efforts than Global South. The other approach is the within country approach. As Matti and Carta said in their 2020 article, whereas every country has a multiplicity of sources of territorial emissions, extraction generally occurs in geographically specific places where the resources are located, affecting specific workers and communities. So it's important to identify geographical within country criteria, possibly with local communities, in order to identify to develop unburnable carbon scenarios at the extraction unit scale, as you can see in this image, which represent a multi-criteria spatial analysis for the extractive basin of the North Sea, which will help these within countries analysis can help decision makers to can support the decision making in their decision making process. In conclusion, these geographical approaches and criteria will help us geovisualizing climate justice by identifying unburnable carbon countries and unburnable carbon areas, and therefore supporting decision-making at different levels, governmental, intergovernmental levels, local levels, in order to achieve a fair and just transition away from fossil fuels. So thank you very much for the attention.